Okay, so Annie, as we were saying just before we got on air, I've been looking forward to having this conversation with you to explore some of the wisdom that you've got in Plentiful. So, I'd love to dive straight into what you call as the four key lies for high performing, ambitious individuals, and the ones that they suffer from in particular. I remember when I heard you speak in the US when I was traveling to the US, you mentioned these are the ones that people who tend to be sort of success driven, ambitious, high performers are the ones that suffer from this the most. And I believe that's your niche as well. So uh,
Yes.
let's dive in.
All right, let's do it. Well, I think the biggest thing to remember is that anytime there's a high performer or anytime in your life that you're driven by a goal or you're going after an accomplishment, these lies are going to sneak in, and they're very subtle and they're very sneaky. And it's really important to be aware of how they impact you. So I'll walk you through these lies. And I just want you, as the audience, right, to think about, where does this show up in your life? So, for example, right, if the first lie is that productivity is essential for success, you really want to look at, okay, what behavior am I taking every single day that's driving me deeper and deeper into that lie? So if you believe that productivity is essential for success, you're probably, pushing yourself to the extreme and working overtime to try to achieve success. But what if it could be easy? What if the behaviors that you're taking are driving you deeper into this concept that might not serve you? So we're talking about this lie and we're thinking, okay, now what behaviors drive the lie? What negative future will be created if you stay in those behaviors and go after that lie? And then what's the negative environment that you're going to create for yourself if you stay in that lie? So I would ask you, Akash, like, from your perspective, when you're fixated on productivity and telling yourself, I need to go after this, I need to be productive all the time, what would you say are some of the negative behaviors that show up in you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this lie is one that resonates with me a lot. I'd say that it's probably constantly looking at how I can fill my calendar. It's it's starting to like almost beat myself up if I don't hit a certain amount of output in a day. Um, I think there's also an element of like tying my self-esteem into how much I can get done in a day and wearing that sort of like a badge of honor. Um, and then it bleeds into like, all right, now this morning I was like, oh, maybe I should start waking up even earlier, or maybe I should go bleed it into the night, or start working more on the weekends. And then it's just looking at what, where are there pockets in time that I have, and that's probably where, and then it just spirals, and then I probably have some sort of episode of burnout. My body starts showing signs, which for me it tends to be like my skin. I start getting rashes,
Mhm.
or I start getting like twitching on my
Eye twitching, yes.
eye twitching, dry skin shows up. I get these like things on my scalp. So yeah, then I know I've overcooked it.
You've overdone it, right? And what's interesting about that is your body is actually having an adrenalized response then to the stress that you are creating for yourself. So
Yes.
your health is deteriorating in certain ways, all because this productivity concern has taken over, right? And so I think you even indicated, right, not only are there behaviors that show up, but there's a negative future where you're so burned out, you can't bring your gifts and your talents into this world. So this productivity is absolutely essential for success lie causes so many different threats to the body, to the business, to how you show up, that if you don't think through how these things are impacting you, you wouldn't be willing to change and get yourself out of this lie. So I think that you've identified not only the behaviors that come out of it, but the negative future, which you don't want, which is that burnout, and then the negative environment. You're so tired and you're so burned out, you cannot bring the gift that is you to the world. So that's the first lie. Pretty heavy, I think,
And
sometimes, but
how do you how do you then find the balance between being productive and there's
so
that as a
being being productive, the key here is, and this is something funny that most people laugh about, when we're constantly looking to fill our calendar, every time something isn't full in the calendar, we try to fill it, right? When we constantly do that, we're not filling the calendar with anything for ourselves or for our development. We're filling the calendar with the task and completion of tasks. So when we do that, we don't give the right side of our brain, which is the emotional connected side, the ability to get any level of gratification for anything that is not work. And over time, that burns out the left side of your brain so that your left side of your brain can't be there for you. And your self gratification side goes into overdrive. So then that's where people go from burnout to like laziness sometimes because they're like, well, I've worked so hard. I deserve this, instead of having a more balanced schedule where every time something comes off your schedule, you put in a chunk of time for yourself.
And
This
that,
is a big thing for the productivity lie to change it up.
yeah, and then and I'm assuming that's like the hardest thing to do in the world, right? Like, for
It is
example,
the hardest thing to do.
like for example, today I know it's 3:15 where we're recording now, and I know I've got something at 4 till 5, and then 5 till 6 I've actually got nothing, and then I've got to go somewhere. And all day I've been like eyeing that spot up, like what's gonna go in there. And I'm still like in the back of my mind, I'm
You're
like,
like, what else can I do? What else can I add to this? What else can I? And this is where the big shift, the big stretch or challenge for high performing entrepreneurs is to leave that space for creativity or thinking time. That's the one thing I wish more people would understand is that if you could, when you have an empty block, spend some time in one of these three things: creativity time, thinking time, or rest. Crazy thing to think about, but most of us don't understand that all manifestation, everything we want to create actually comes from rest. And so if we are not blocking in any time to rest, to be creative, or to imagine, then we literally are not allowing our gifts and talents to show up the way they're meant to.
wow.
Our gifts and talents are then coming from that place of exhaustion or burnout or grind, and that doesn't serve the world or ourselves or our audience.
I remember you said something like the best way to manifest is take a nap.
It is. And most like this is something I fought for years, Akash. I was like, there is no way taking a nap is going to get me where I want to go. But here's the cool part about it. When you take a nap, you want to take a nap that's 18 minutes to 23 minutes in length. Some people need 18, some people need 23, some people need something in between there. But the key is you just want to sleep or rest enough that you dip into your subconscious and then come right back out. So that's why that time limit is so key. So the key is before you go into the nap, you set an intention for what you need to take out of that rest experience and what you want to manifest from it. So, for example, as an entrepreneur, you might say to yourself, I'm going to take this nap and I'm looking for knowledge or wisdom or insight on what is the next best step for me to take. And
Yeah.
then you'll go into that slumber time, your conscious and your subconscious brain will sync up, and then you'll come out of it and you'll typically have the answer. And that's how you start to develop this piece of your brain that allows you to manifest from rest.
How do you find the balance between productivity and laziness then? Because,
Well, see, a lot of people who are high performing entrepreneurs, they literally have nothing in the middle ground. They're like, I'm either high performing or I'm lazy. And that is actually a lie that you're telling yourself as well, right? Because of course there's something in that middle ground. In the middle ground is optimized. I'm optimized, right? So we all think we have to be high performing all the time, striving, going after all these goals and accomplishments. But actually, if we're in the optimized environment, which is dead on in the middle ground between high performing and lazy, that's actually where we want to be more. And a lot of people don't spend that much time getting to that optimized state. They just overwork themselves and add more in or get up earlier or stay up later to try to do more rather than to do more at an optimized and effective state.
it's probably good timing for this. I was walking with my wife this morning, and for about 2 years, I've stopped using an alarm clock in the morning. And I said to her, the phase that we're going through, I think I'm either going to have to add in the evenings or I'm going to have to wake up earlier. Like one on one's going to have to go. And she was like, why? It's like, just feeling so overwhelmed. I need to find more time in the day. And I almost think the answer is actually probably not, obviously not to do that. But secondly, is actually just figure out like what thinking needs to be done in order to just almost step above what the overwhelm.
Or what do we need to do to address the overwhelm feeling? Because
Yeah.
the overwhelm is coming from the fact that you're trying to do too much in a way that's not as effective as it could be, and you're not giving yourself enough rejuvenation time for your brain to work at that higher level.
Yeah, it's
So
exactly
for
that.
yeah, For most entrepreneurs, I always say to them, I'm like, it's not that you need to do more, it's that you need to spend time doing things that allow your brain to reset so that your talents and your gifts can come out. And that usually involves creative time, imagination time, or rest time.
What does creative and imagination time look like for you?
So if you're, when you're a kid and you like imagine, oh, wouldn't this be amazing if this occurred? And as we get to be adults, we stop imagining. We only imagine with accomplishments. So we're like, oh, I'm going to go after this goal. I'm going to hit this goal. And then I'm going to imagine what life might be like after that. The difference is, what if I'm just imagining and in a dreamlike state, which puts you into more of a flow state? And so, what I do when I have like blocks of imagination time, I literally sit there, I listen to beautiful music, and I imagine what are some of the big, beautiful things I could create in this world if there were no limitations. So, for example, I might think about a program I want to create for women, or a program I want to create for men, or a retreat that I want to put together, but I'm in the imagination of it. I'm not planning for it, I'm not executing on it. All I'm doing is staying in that creative space where I can imagine the potential, because that raises the vibration and it gives you access to what I call like divine energy that allows you to create more and more of what you want from a place of being very emotionally connected. And emotion is what drives all change, all goal setting, vision setting. Everything comes from emotion. We don't spend enough time feeling that emotion in our body to let it lead us.
Well, here's what's interesting. When I get into this productive cycle, I get into a state where I feel less and less as well. I almost just go into robot mode. Um,
Correct. That's what happens to almost everyone.
yeah. Well, literally, there's no feeling of anything.
No, you're shutting down your emotionality in order to achieve. But the reality is, the more you can weave in the emotionality with the achievement, the more you're going to feel that success. And the more you're going to feel like you're accomplishing something that really matters to you and you can sustain.
Yeah,
That's
interesting.
why most entrepreneurs will say, like, I very rarely feel successful. Well, of course not, because you're shutting down your emotionality and all of your emotions to get the things done, because you think task completion and goal accomplishment is more important than the emotional feeling.
Yeah. I also think there's an element of like and I may be wrong, but when you're on the entrepreneur's journey and there's so many ups and downs that come with it, the almost quote unquote cold state comes from having so many of those, well, you could call it lows or you could call it like periods of threat that you just think you just become numb to it almost. And
Well,
then
yeah, because
you
you're
don't
trying to
become numb to
survive
the
it.
ups either.
Yeah, you're trying to survive it, right? And there's a part of your brain that's like, if I can just keep myself at this state, I won't feel the high, I won't feel the low, but that means you also won't feel the success. And success is an emotional feeling. It's not an accomplishment that we're going after. That's where our brains get messed up. We
Mm.
believe that success is an accomplishment or a series of accomplishments, but the reality is success is an emotional feeling. You have the ability to experience success every single moment of every single day if you allow yourself to recognize what emotion you link to success.
Interesting. And are there specific emotions that link to success, or is it more like could anything be linked to it?
Well, it's not that anything could be linked to it, because if it's just an accomplishment and it's a goal, then you're going to very quickly, after you achieve that goal, reset on the next goal, and you will feel maybe a short moment of, oh, I'm glad I achieved that. For me, what's really unique and what I've learned over the past 7 years of doing all this work is that when I'm successful at the end of the day, it's because I've broken my day up into three main things. One, I have to create impact, something for myself. Two, I have to create impact with my family. And three, I have to create impact with clients. If I can cover all three of those things where I have a little bit of impact in each, then my day feels amazing. But I
Mm.
had to define for myself, what do I need to create? Do I need to go after impact? Do I need to go after an accomplishment? And for me, the accomplishments never worked. Completing the task list never worked. I needed to have the feeling that I would feel when I would be connected and impactful with myself, connected and impactful with my kids, connected and impactful with clients. So, this is where you really want to look at the areas of your life or the domains of your life that you want to create change in, and then try to identify, what mood do I need to create for myself so that I can feel certain feelings that allow me to feel satisfied or fulfilled.
Yeah, amazing. So let's move on to line number two.
Yes, sir. Lie number 2. All right. So the other big lie is it all falls on me. So entrepreneurs believe that they have to hold the weight of the world. And if they don't do it, nobody else will do it at their standard or their level. And the thing that I realized here is when you get caught in this, it's because as an entrepreneur, you do not have the skill set to delegate effectively or to develop people underneath you. This is really key because if, as an entrepreneur, you're telling yourself it all falls on me, I've got to do everything on my own, it's because you don't have the skill set built yet to delegate effectively to your team. And you might not have the skill set to develop the leaders on your team to be what you need them to be to support you.
What does effective delegation look like?
Well, effective delegation, from my perspective, because I've worked with all the SEAL teams, right? I find that effective delegation has 4 parts, and these 4 parts are literally mostly missed by almost everybody when they delegate or hand something off. So, in order to delegate effectively, you have to really dig into the why behind why you're handing this off to someone, why they're the right person for this and you are not, which means you have to explain to them the why behind the business, the company, you personally, them, why they are essential for this. And most people just are like, hey, here's a task I need you to complete. Can you get it done by Friday?
Mm.
Right? There's the why behind it that very rarely do we go deep enough into. Then there's a standard of performance. What standard do I want to hold this person to based on how I understand the standard of performance to be? Most of us never talk about the standard performance that we have internally, and we very rarely speak it out loud to team members when we delegate to them. So, for example, if I'm going to hand you this task, this is how I see the standard of excellence or standard performance for how you need to meet this task. So, for example, if I need somebody to show up on a call, I'd be like, when you show up on this call, I want you to be in this manner of attire. I want you to be in this level of vibrational energy. I want you to be prepped for 10 minutes before on these 3 things. It might feel like we're micromanaging, but we're not. Most people need that insight to show up the way that we want them to show up. So that's the second piece, standard performance. Third piece, you have to have the power to act. You could very easily hand off a task to someone, but if that person doesn't feel like they have the power to act, they're going to get stopped as they try to go after completing the task for you. So I spend a lot of time talking with the people that I'm handing things off to on what could come up as a contingency here if you hit a roadblock, because I want you to always feel like you have the power to act no matter what. That's the third part. And the fourth part is commitment. You have to ask for a commitment. Otherwise, if people are not committing, basically like, oh yeah, yep, I can totally get that done. And you're like, that's never going to happen. So that commitment and the request for their commitment has to be something that's verbalized. I know that's a lot when you think about delegation, but if you don't have a process and a structure for it, it's never going to be duplicatable and people aren't going to be able to show up and meet you where you want them to meet you.
Yeah, then that's where the control factor comes in, and
Correct.
you end up just spinning your wheels, right?
Spinning your wheels the whole time, and then you're upset because none of your deadlines are being met. People aren't getting back to you in the time frame you want, and the projects aren't getting completed on time.
Yeah, and how do you suggest people to do this delegation? Is it in a meeting? Is it written down? Is it
So
everything?
we always use a template for it, and we cover those 4 key aspects for everything we pass off. So
Oh,
yes, we do it in our meetings. Yes, we do it one-on-one. We literally use the template for everything. Because again, right, it's on me if I pass something to someone and they don't meet my expectations. It's not on them, which is a different way of looking at it as an entrepreneur.
so you almost have that template, just you fill in the blanks.
Yep, that's what we do. And then I'll ask someone, I'm like, okay, I've given you the template. We've talked through the template. What am I missing? Right?
Mm.
Because they have to own that project.
So just to recap, it's the why, it's the power to act,
Performance,
standard performance, power to
power
act.
to act, and then asking for a commitment.
Is a standard performance, is that a tangible number or deliverable, or is that more the way we do it, or is it a combination?
So the standard performance, it can depend. If there's a metric that you're looking for and you've tied into that person's activity, then you'd use the metric there. For me, the standard performance is usually the way I, as an entrepreneur, would want it to be done. And a
Okay.
lot of times, if you're running a business, you don't speak your expectations of performance to your team. You just assume and
Mm.
you lead them the way you would want to be led. And that is the biggest breakdown for most entrepreneurs, is the fact that if I'm leading my team the way I want to be led, and everybody on the team is not me because there's only one you, then I am literally leading in the most inaccurate and ineffective way possible. So it's not about leading the way you want to be led. It's about leading to the functional level of your team and of your people.
So is this over communication effectively?
Well, it's not over communication. I would say it's very specific and detailed communication that has a process to it,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Because it needs to be the same. Language is the thing that allows us to coordinate action. So if we're both using different types of language, if we don't have a template that everyone's following, then there's always going to be that disconnect and there's always the possibility for failure.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that. I've got my notes here. Line number 3.
Yes,
Grind.
line number 3,
Yeah, go for it.
suffering or grinding as the fuel.
Yeah.
So this is a big one because if you think about it, we are rewarded to suffer. Even though if you were to look at your life and ask yourself, okay, where am I suffering in my life? If you look at where you're suffering, it's actually a moment where you are not coordinating action as effectively as you could with a team in your world. So when people are in this space around, I'm going to suffer, I'm going to grind, because if I suffer and grind, I'm going to achieve. That's one of the biggest lies that we create, because in reality, the suffering and the grinding is just fueling our trauma. It's linked to our trauma in some way, shape, or form. So what I think about with suffering and grinding is I'm like, okay, what's the behavior that drives this lie? The behavior is I have to get as much done as possible and I have to suffer while I do it. Then you think about, okay, what's the negative future? Well, if I keep suffering and grinding, I'm going to miss out on key connection moments with my spouse, my kids, my clients, even my family, because you're so fixated on, I have to get more done all the time. And then the negative environment that shows up for most people is they're not going to feel happy. They're going to feel like they have an obligation to the business where the business runs them instead of them running the business. We don't create businesses to be in the grind. We create businesses to experience freedom and joy and fulfillment and impact. But when we create this grind and we use it as our fuel for everything, it puts us right back typically into our traumatic experiences in life and decreases what we can bring to the world.
Can you expand a little bit more on the trauma aspect you just touched on there?
Yes. So for a lot of people who choose suffering or the grind as their fuel, it's because something has happened in their background that has told them that the only way for them to get what they want is to suffer. And that suffering is good. And that suffering is going to get them an outcome that is different than what they've experienced in the past. But the reality is, your trauma, whatever it might be, it's going to hold you and keep you safe. It doesn't care if you're miserable. And so, what I've found is that a lot of entrepreneurs, they would rather in their subconscious brain be miserable and safe than to step out of that and feel the joy and the excitement of building what they're building and living a more balanced life. It's just hard to do that when you haven't resolved that trauma. So, being aware of the trauma that created that suffering and grind mentality is really key to getting you out of that lie.
What are some common experiences that people tend to have had in order that fuels this?
Well, it could be everything from like maybe they, throughout their whole life, they were mediocre performers and they tried to work super hard all the time. And maybe sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Then one day they worked extremely hard and they got something they wanted. Well, now that lesson is cemented. The only way I get what I want is if I suffer to get there. Even though they might have received other great things from different moments in their life, that one moment is so cemented that now they believe it to be true that in order to get anything of value, I have to suffer to get there.
Wow.
So that's one experience, right? A couple of other ones are, some people who have ADHD and OCD, for them, it can be as simple as when I do 15,000 things and I check off all my boxes, that's when I feel good about myself. And therefore, I have to suffer to feel good about myself. So there are a lot of different things that can happen in your life that can contribute to this lie. It's important to look at, okay, follow that lie back and look at your childhood and say, okay, well, when did I first learn that suffering got me what I wanted. And is that true or is that not true? What do I want to be true instead?
Do you think people can actually rewire this association? And if so, what are some of the steps that that people take to get there?
Well, people can definitely rewire it because I do it all the time with all my clients. But I think that the key is you have to know what that sort of seed trauma is or what that root trauma or thought is in order to build off of that with a customized plan for you as a person because everyone is very different. But I do think that a couple of key steps, the first thing if you're working on this suffering notion is to realize that emotion is the key to everything. So if you can allow yourself to get out of suffering by feeling the positive emotions and making them good instead of making the suffering good, like we don't want to reward the suffering, right? So what we want to reward is the positive emotions that come up when you're not suffering. So for example, one of my clients the other week, I had said to him, you grind all the time. I'm like, what I'd like to see you do instead is I want to see you do something that's creative, or I want you to go to a beautiful place and just sit and experience that to feel what emotions come up for you. And then when you feel those emotions, I want you to celebrate those emotions, make them good for you, tell yourself how amazing it is that you're in that space feeling those things, so that that can be an anchor to offset the need to suffer. Like that's a very small step and it was very customized to him. But he literally went to the beach, had an incredible experience. And he's like, oh my God, I feel like I'm completely rejuvenated now and I can see my business in a totally different way. I'm like, well, that's the point. Suffering as a lens causes you to see the business in a way that you can't grow it as much as you'd want. So we need those moments of creativity and imagination and connection with the environment to be able to step ourselves out of that suffering.
Amazing. And then line number 4.
Yes, sir. Line number 4 is all about comparing yourself to others and telling yourself that comparison or competition is essential for your growth. So, this is one of the biggest lies that entrepreneurs tell themselves, and they get so caught up in this need to compare to the success of everybody else around them. Oh, I should be doing better. I should be doing more. I should be like this guy. This guy's making this amount of money. Why am I not making this amount of money? But when you do that, you completely devalue your own entrepreneurial journey and experience. And so for every entrepreneur I work with, I'm like, what if your journey is the only journey that matters? What
Mhm.
if your journey has nothing to do with anybody else's journey? And as you compare yourself to others, what you end up doing is stealing the joy from your own entrepreneurial journey and stealing the lessons from that journey. So when I'm talking to people about comparison and competition being essential for growth in this lie that they've created, I look at the behavior that drives them into that, which is typically spending a lot of time on social media, watching what competitors are doing, and then deciding, oh my God, why didn't I think of that? I am bad because I didn't think to do that. And they're making more money than me because they thought to do something I didn't. And then we end up spiraling and taking on all these different projects that we don't need to take on that devalue and derail us from the journey that we're on. So, this is, I think, one of the biggest ones that affects the fitness community. And this is why I am so focused on helping people get out of this because the negative future that they will create from living in that lie is that they're never good enough and they're never going to get where they want to go. And if you stay in that mental state, there's no hope for growth in your business or growth for self. Even though the lie tells you, I have to compare myself and compete to grow. You're basically creating an environment for yourself where you're doing the exact opposite of what you want because the lie and the lie's energy doesn't allow you to go after your own personal journey.
Wow. Why do you think that's prevalent, so prevalent in the fitness industry? Do you think it's because it's a very aesthetics based
I
status?
think it is.
Mm.
Yes, it's a very aesthetic based business. And I think that people are much more vocal in the fitness industry about here's what I'm doing, here's what I'm, working on, here's what I'm creating as results. And so you can't help but hear that a lot if you're on social media. But my biggest request for anyone who's in the fitness industry is to allow yourself to value your personal journey because it's not like anybody else's. There's so much abundance to go around for everybody that you're supposed to be here to attract your particular flavor of people based on what you are working on for you. It's not about, as strange as this sounds, it's not about, finding target markets that are completely distinct from who you are. you're going to attract the people that are working on the same things you're working on. And the more you can identify these lies and share how you're working through them with the audience, the more they're going to trust you and want to work with you and want to help you grow.
Amazing. Now you mentioned a few different steps to reversing these lies. I understand you have a framework you call the 4 steps to truth. So now
Yes.
that for those listening, I'm sure there's at least one of those, that probably more, that have resonated. What are now the next steps to turning these lies into the real truths?
So the biggest thing that I could tell you is I have a framework for it and a roadmap for it. And basically, if you follow these 4 things, it will allow you to identify what's been going on with these lies. We just talked about like the 4 biggest lies, but because everyone's brain is so customized, there might be some other lies that are in your life. So I'll walk you through the 4 steps. And as you go back and you listen to this recording, you're going to hear that I ask these questions and I talk about these steps each time we talk about a lie. So the first one is you want to be able to identify what is the lie that you're telling yourself. So, for example, if you're saying to yourself, gosh, I really believe it has to be this way, does it? Question that and see if it turns out, well, actually, it doesn't have to be this way. So that's why you want to be able to identify, is it a lie or is it not, right? The second piece is you have to identify the false reward or the skill that you're giving yourself from staying in the lie. So for example, with, suffering or grinding, the reward you're getting is you're getting a lot of tasks done. You're completing a lot of things, right? So that false reward of completion is fueling that lie that I have to keep suffering and grinding because that's the only way I complete all these tasks. Then you look at number 3, which is you have to identify the cost or the threat of staying in the lie. So if I decide I'm going to stay in the lie because I like getting all these things done, the biggest threat to me is connection. I'm going to lose the connection with people around me that I should have, which is really the only currency that matters in building a business. So if you know that by staying in the grind and the suffering, you're not going to build the connection that you need to grow your business, then you're going to stay at a certain level of performance and revenue. So it's good to know what that cost is for you. And then you're going to look at reframing into the new truth. So if I've always told myself that suffering is essential for my growth, I could stay and said, creating ease and grace every day is essential for me to bring my talents to the world. That's a very different way of looking at how you would set up your day. Now, that statement might be very customized to me and what I need. And that's why, as an individual, you have to go deeper and identify, okay, what do I feel emotionally when I say this statement that reframes my truth? So, the one question I say to everybody is if you can do none of these things and you're not sure where to begin, the one thing you can ask yourself every day is, what do I want to be true? Not what do I think is true, but what do I want to be true? Do I want it to be true that suffering and grinding is the only way that I get to growth and success? Or do I want ease, fun, enjoyment to be the way I get to success? Well, I definitely want this one. So, what behaviors do I need to have to create that future state? That's like the hack that gets you to it pretty quickly if you can't do all the mental processing that I just walked through.
With you mentioned connection a few times. Why do people struggle with connection?
Well, I think people struggle with connection because it requires you to be very authentic, very trusting, and very vulnerable. And most people don't have a formula for how to build vulnerability or how to build their authenticity. They think I have to be a certain way to get this audience or this group of people to respect me and to admire me and to want to work with me. But the reality is, people will want to work with you if you are authentic, you are trusting, and you are vulnerable. So, from my perspective, spending some time on what do I need to show up very vulnerably for myself and my audience? What do I need to show up very trusting? And what do I need to show up very authentic to who I am? That's a really great focal point if you want to break through a lot of the lies, because connection requires you to be present, requires you to be in yourself, and it requires you to be generously listening to other people. So if you can focus on connection instead of one of these lies, you're going to grow your business.
And that applies to not just, you mentioned the audience example, but I'm assuming that means team, that means your spouse, that means your family, everything, right?
Everything is better with better connection. right? And connection, from my perspective, is the only currency that matters in this world, because if you cannot connect, then you can't feel the emotions of success.
Wow. And you said something also around coordinating action and how that is the key to success, and how those who've managed to grow serious impact in the world has always been because they've been able to coordinate action through a lot of different people.
Correct. And the key really is, like, if you take nothing else away from this call, but you're able to remember that the level of coordination of action that you can do in life with all the different teams around you, the more you're able to coordinate action with these different teams, your spouse team, your kid team, your family team, your client team, the more you can grow as a person and the more you're going to grow as a business owner. So, coordination of action is the key to everything.
How do you, when you advise business owners, executives, people who are managing teams, how do you advise them almost organizing their days and weeks in order to make sure that they're getting enough time doing things that they need to do on their own, which is building, creating, whatever, and then making sure that they're doing enough coordination, managing, making sure everything works like you've just said? How do you find the balance, and how do you, because I think a lot of people can, and myself included, feel guilty in like potentially you're not preparing quickly enough for a meeting, or you skip delegation steps because
Yes.
you don't see the value in it, or you don't you struggle to almost create the value in your time for it. How do you recommend almost setting? Is it something you should do first? Is it something like?
Well, what we find is that the biggest gaps for most people come around the planning side, right? There's not as much planning being done as there should be. So if you're in your life and you're like, wow, I have no time to do anything, it's because you have not set aside any amount of time to plan.
Yeah.
So the first thing we work with people on is, when are we setting up planning time in your schedule that we can cement that in so that you have time to plan for everything from, here's how I'm going to hold the meeting, here's how I'm going to manage this person, here's how I'm going to develop this person on my team. There has to be time and thought and energy put into, how do I want to show up to enable my team to be better leaders? So the first thing we do is we make sure that planning time is consistent on a calendar every single week. That's one of the biggest chunks. And then we also add in, deep thought time, which is that creative or imagination time, because we need to be able to have thoughts and excitement and that emotion running through us to be a better leader for the team. So those are two things that we do with people that we're coaching. There's a lot more to this, obviously, but those two things are things that anyone, any entrepreneur of any background and experience can immediately implement.
Amazing. How can people find out more about what you do, Annie? And if they want to
Sure.
potentially reach out?
Well, the easiest way is just to email me directly at it's Annie at sealteamleaders.com. That's the easiest way, because if you're looking for leadership support, performance support, or if you're looking to work on your traumas to make sure that your revenue can explode, that's the best way to get in touch. And then I'll spend a little bit of time with you, or our team will, and we'll figure out what is it that you most need. And if we can't help, we're very clear on that. So Annie at sealteamleaders.com.
Now, Annie, why do you continue to do what you do?
It's the best feeling in the entire world to watch an entrepreneur go from living in their trauma, living in the lie, to living in the truth, and then exploding their business. There's nothing better.
Wow, amazing. And one more question. Who should we have on the podcast next?
Ooh, well, it depends on where you want to go, but I always like having, for example, like Larry, my business partner. He and I were together for 15 years, and he's got some incredible content around leadership and team performance that I think would just blow your minds.
Amazing. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast, Annie. Really appreciate your time.
You're welcome. I love this, and I hope everyone takes some good value from it. There's a lot that we talked about, so way to go, you. This was great.